when you look at it in totality, now the Mets are still spending about $355 million on their roster this coming season, and they kept their own guys. They kept Brandon Nimmo and they kept Edwin Diaz, and then they brought in Verlander. So it's not as if this is a money saving thing. We all know that it's not that, because the Mets, basically wanted to guarantee half the contract. And then the rest of that contract would be on a year-by-year basis, essentially, depending on, plate appearances, time out in the field, and everything else. I'm telling you, these insurance doctors or whoever else, we're telling them, look, we think this is a 6-year potential problem. And then after that, it's, we're not buying into this. So we'll back you for 6 years, which is essentially what the Mets offered Carlos Correa. They said, okay, we're going to give you this money for 12 years. We'll give you to you now for 6 years guaranteed. And then the next 6 years would then fall under the certain parameters that you would have to meet as a player. In other words, you'd have to bet on the health of yourself.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because this is something you bring up all the time about, a player owing it to the union to be able to get out and get the top dollar in the free agent market. Now, this is something I thought of yesterday. I think Carlos Correa would have preferred to be a Met. I really do believe that.
I agree.
And the totality of the deal, if he had finished it healthy, was the most amount of money they could have made in a New York Mets uniform. However, if he would have accepted a deal that was not guaranteed and the least or not the highest amount of money guaranteed, the union would have been so pissed off at him, because it would have set a new precedent with injured players or guys who have had injuries in the past. And there's no way that Scott Boras, the union, Carlos Correa was going to do any of that.
You're exactly right. And that's why he took the $200 million in the first 6 years as opposed to the $157.5 million in the first 6 years from the Twins. So the Twins are paying him more money per year in the first 6 years of that contract. And then there's a vesting option where the totality of the contract is actually less than what he would have gotten had he stayed here with the Mets. But I don't necessarily know that they would have written a contract the way that the Twins did. So in all, I mean, he took the most money in the shortest period of time. I don't blame him for doing that. He's got to get his when he gets a chance. But overall, the totality of the money, if in fact he stays healthy, would have been more had he been here, or had the Giants even come down this road and offered something like this. So I don't blame him. I certainly don't blame the Mets. The Mets, did everything they possibly could to keep him here, and I think he wanted to play here. But when you look at the AAV and you look at the numbers of $200 million compared to $157.5, that's a significant number for a player, especially a player that's dealing. Now, by the way, he still has to pass the physical, in Minnesota, which I think
apparently a lot of that was done. It was tweeted out that the ankle issue was cleared at that point by the Minnesota Twins, so this wouldn't happen again. But, I did see. Well, that's what he's got, a plate in his vajankle. Do you remember that whole thing? You probably don't remember the vajankle, do you?
I don't. No, I don't.
You said it.
Mean, I don't know unless that he put those together. I'm not sure.
No, it was a thing. It was a show that I watched, and I forget that it was Mr. In Between was the name of the show. And in the show was a comedy show, and the guy had a
vajankle, that's right.
No, he had a foot fetish.
Oh.
And he went out to one of the sex stores and bought this.
Oh, yes.
Vajankle.
Yes, vajankle, yeah.
So he could,
Sharks, you've heard of foot fetishes. And you've heard of vaginas. What if I combine the two? Sharks.
Vajankle.
So anyway,
all right.
He might have had a plate in his vajankle, and that's why Steve Cohen ended up passing
it's kind of
on Carlos Correa.
Look, it's a deal that, and I'm sure that, listen, Correa had a good year, a decent year in Minnesota, got off to a really slow start there, and I'm sure he liked it there, and I'm sure he liked the group of guys that were there. And I'm sure that team was really disappointed that he was initially going to go to the Giants, and then the Giants passed, then he comes to the Mets, and then the thought that he was never even going to go back to Minnesota. And, of course, all of the reports out there that Boris put out there that he had another team that was a legitimate suitor obviously turned out to be correct. And the player has to do what's in the best interest of himself and his family, and I think that's really what this comes down to.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of Yankee fans that were celebrating this yesterday going, oh, is Steve Cohen still the king? Or the Mets still the team in New York? And all these things because we were so excited about Carlos Correa being signed. So I think that where you can criticize the Mets is Steve Cohen probably jumped the gun a little bit on that trip in Hawaii, assuming that the San Francisco Giants were probably backing out for illegitimate reasons and said, I'm going to go and scoop him up because he's the missing piece. And it seemed to be a little bit, I don't know, ahead of where he probably should have been mentally with Carlos Correa physically.
He'll learn.
Yeah, and then also, I think maybe you can criticize a Met fan or someone like me that was screaming about it being so happy, not waiting to see how the physical played out because of what happened in San Francisco. But to sit here and think that Steve Cohen now is going to be frugal or backed out of this deal because of the luxury tax or didn't want to pay the money or now all of a sudden Steve Cohen is scared to spend that money. That is nonsense.
You know, I think this I just think this just opens the door for Shohei Ohtani. If, in fact, they want to go down that road and try to make a trade, I really do believe that that's, what the next target will be. I don't think that would have been the case had they signed Correa to this enormous deal and be up around $390 million in salary. So, that's where Shohei Ohtani comes in this whole picture.
I think he might have gotten both of them at some point. I think that just because he got Correa didn't mean that he was out on Ohtani, but I think it's more likely now that he figures out a way to get Ohtani. And quite frankly, I think he's pissed about this whole thing.
Well, the other thing, too, is you have to remember, you got Pete Alonso sitting there and you got Jeff McNeil sitting there. And they're eventually going to need new contracts.
Yeah.
And if Pete goes off like he did last year, and again this year, and they're not, think about the amount of money he's going to get.
And just think, too, like, this is clearly a legitimate issue because the San Francisco Giants' initial offer that they agreed to terms with Carlos Correa was over $350 million, wasn't it?
Is right around there.
That's $350 million guaranteed.
Yes.
He just took $150 million less guaranteed to go back to Minnesota.
Now, I will tell you, there's a $70 million vesting kicker in there that would add to the $200 million that he has.
Right, but if he...
So it'll be $270 if he gets all of it.
If he gets all of it.
It's $80 million. Essentially less than what the Giants initially offered, assuming that he would pass the physical.
Right. So that's a big deal. We're talking about a third team, and at least, it could be more depending on what ends up happening with him and his injury, at least $80 million difference.
So if you take a look at it, so you got 13 years, $350 from the Giants, and you have 6 years, $200 million from the Twins. In the first 6 years of this contract, he'll have made more with the Twins than he would have made with the Mets or the Giants. That's the way you got to look at it. It's the AAV. That's the number that is the key number for the player right now. And those 6 years basically tell me that most doctors, and I'm sure all the experts and the different insurance companies out there are saying, this is all we are willing to guarantee because of that ankle injury and the other injury that he had when he slid into second base after that surgery had been done and the reaction when he slid into second base where that injury was. So I just think that he got his money for the first 6 years without question.
Yeah, and I would have been okay with it if Steve Cohen had gone up to that $200 million deal and had matched what the Twins were doing and Carlos Correa was a Met this morning. I would have been fine with it. I would have been excited about it. Would have been a little bit nervous because of the way everything went, but I would have been excited that it got done. So I don't want to sit here like a hypocrite and all of a sudden be like, screw Carlos Correa. The Mets will be fine without him, and screw Scott Boras. I wanted Carlos Correa to be a Met. I wanted him to be a Met prior to him agreeing to terms, and I wanted him to be a Met this morning. But there's sometimes you got to make the right call, and I just have to trust with the way that this thing went. two separate teams, then the Minnesota Twins swooping in and then giving him this 6-year contract. There has to be a real legitimate issue. This can't be two teams and now three teams that are scared of something that really they shouldn't be scared of. Clearly, there's a problem here.
Yeah, well, that's the point. I mean, at the end of the day, I think they offered an extremely fair contract, and they wanted the player to, bet on himself long term. And I think he did that with the Twins, but he did so by getting more money in the first 6 years with the Twins as opposed to with the Giants and the Mets. That's the big discrepancy here. Because even he, by accepting that $70 million kicker for those next 6 years, it feels like even he recognizes that there's an issue or a potential issue that could happen to him.
Yeah, no, of course.
Or he may have to see, this is the other thing. In 6 years, they may say to him, look, we got to go back in there and fix that.
Well, that's what I was thinking throughout this whole process was he's probably going to have another surgery at some point that knocks him out for close to an entire season. Like, that's the only thing I could think of that would make all these teams so scared of what was going on. Like, he might miss an entire season, and then maybe he's going to come back and not be the same.
What he might also find, which is going to be really interesting, for the Twins, he'll play shortstop. And shortstop, it's the movement. He's got to be able to, the range thing. And you never know how that part of it is going to affect him. Here, he would have been third base, would have been a little bit more protected playing third base, and may have been able to get an extra year or two out of that contract because he wouldn't be playing shortstop.
Yeah, I still think, remember what Steve Cohen said when he thought that Carlos Correa was going to be a Met after he agreed to terms. He said that this was the missing piece. We needed more offense. This was the missing piece. So now...
you got to be careful what you say.
Right.
It's pivot time.
It is pivot time.
It is pivot time. So I would ask Steve Cohen, all right, you still have a missing piece then. So now how are you going to fill that this late in the offseason? I don't know. That's what scares me about the offense.
I kind of feel like they have the same team coming back. With the exception of Verlander and a couple pieces they had in the bullpen. But I would just say...
Kodai Senga is another big thing.
Right. I mean, that's the point. So it's not that you have to go out there and there's not like third basemen all over the place.
Well, not at this point.
He's got guys, he's got Escobar and guys like that. And they do have a couple guys in the minors. You don't know what's going to happen with them, whether or not Beatty and Alvarez are going to be significant offensive contributors. We don't know that yet. So it's not like they're bare, like they have nothing. But, there's also trades to be had. There's probably going to be a player or two that could be cut. Maybe they take a flyer on it like the Yankees took on Carpenter. You never know. So it's like I was disappointed that he's not here for sure, but I totally understand why he's not here.
The people that are really disappointed is everybody, and we talked about it that morning, that ran to Mets.com to buy season ticket packages, whether a 20-game plan or whatever, half a season plan, and then apparently they sold like millions of dollars of season ticket plans that morning.
You know what? They're still going to really have a good team. And
but wait a second. The reason why people did that morning is they thought Carlos Correa was going to be on the team, and now he's not. I'm not saying they have a bad team, but clearly that was that over-the-top move that got people really, really excited. Yeah. It got me really, really excited.
It got all of us excited.
And now I'm like, all right, good off-season. Not great off-season. Good.
I say good great. I say great off-season. If they would have added Correa, it would have been an A+ off-season.
That's a good one.
This is an A off-season.
It's a B+. Nah,
this is an A.
It's a B+.
A+ would have been Correa added to this lineup and an ungodly almost $400 million salary structure, which would have been ridiculous. But hey, we're at $355 right now, and I'm sure he'll spend some more money. And remember, like I said, he still has some of his own players that he's going to have to resign, especially if those players come back and duplicate what they did last year.
Right, but there's a lot of that they looked in the future. Obviously, they're thinking the same way we're thinking, and there's guys like Verlander are going to come off. There's guys like Scherzer that are going to come off in a couple of years. The Robinson-Cano deal is going to be gone eventually. There's going to be a lot of money that is freed up in the future to be able to take care of those other guys.
Well, the other guys and Ohtani, don't forget him.
And yes, right,
Shohei
Ohtani.
Don't forget him.
Yes.
So would that make you happy if they make the trade for Ohtani during the trade deadline?
I don't want it. I would rather not trade him him. I would rather get him. He's going to be a free agent. I'd rather sign him in free agency as opposed to giving up the entire farm system.
Yeah, I remember and if you did trade for him, you'd have to sign him. You couldn't let him get the free agency, which would be kind of crazy, which is why you wouldn't be giving up the farm to get him unless he was going to, agree to a contract. But here's the thing, when I have a friend, believe it or not, who's an Angel season ticket holder, and he told me that, most of the Ohtani special days that they have, the bobbleheads and all that stuff for the Angels are in the first half of the season.
Interesting.
So maybe they're getting ready to trade him. Billy Epler's probably knows something, and I'm sure Billy Epler, attracted him to the Angels. He wanted to stay on the West Coast. So let's see what Billy Epler can do here.
See what Steve Cohen can do, because that's what's going to come down to.
He's already done a lot.
Right. Let's see what he can do and make sure that he writes that check and gives him the biggest deal, because there's only so much Billy Epler, I think, can contribute at this point.
I mean, think about this. He's got half the amount of players that the two football teams in town have, and he spent about $70 million more than each of those teams on those players.
Yeah, and I still don't love the lineup. That's the problem.
God, you're unbelievable.
I don't love it. I loved it with Correa in there. I didn't love it with this. I like it. I think they're good. But the stuff that we were saying before Correa was that the Phillies and the Braves might have a better roster than the Mets with all this money spent. Then they got Correa, and we said, not so much. Now we are the Kings going into the season. Now they don't have Correa, so we have to be fair and go back to saying that they might be, even with this offseason, the third most talented team in the division. Might be.
Well, that's why they play the games, Gene.
All right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Boomer and Gio, and everybody's got a family.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the red bell so you're notified when we have new content.